Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we return back to the chill of winter, with over 2 hours of horrors in the snow. So get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. This story happened 3 years ago, and I still have nightmares about it. My mother came to stay with me for a week, which I knew would be a nightmare. We can hardly stand to be in the same room as each other, so fighting is inevitable. On her 5th night, we got into a heated debate about religion, and it somehow turned into a full-out screaming match. About an hour into the screaming, my apartment manager knocked on the door. Before I could even apologize, my mother jumps in and says that I had been threatening her. I was so shocked and appalled that it threw me into a mini panic attack. I grabbed my keys from the key rack and took off. It wasn't the wisest thing to do, I know, but I was so frazzled that I didn't know what else to do. I ended up sobbing my eyes out and just driving. This went on and off for about an hour and 70 miles. Driving has always calmed me down, so even after the tears subsided, I kept going. About another hour later, I saw an exit for a dam, which surprised me. I had lived here for 2 years, and I had no idea there was a dam anywhere nearby. So I decided to go and have a look, even though it was 3 AM and pitch black. I still wasn't ready to head back, and this seemed like a good distraction. It was on another 30 miles of desolate road before I finally reached the dam. It was hard to miss, because it was the only light I had seen for those 30 miles. I crossed the dam and saw that there were a couple of turns leading to campsites. At this point, I also realized that there was a legit lake. Yeah, I know, dam equals lake, but I didn't really put the two together. I decided to flip around and go back to a little parking area that I had seen near the dam. Once there, I parked, and my night took a turn for the terrifying. I parked and proceeded to make one idiotic move after another. I rolled down my windows and could hear the sound of water hitting ashore, but in the light of my headlights, I couldn't see where it was coming from. The mosquitoes were pretty bad, so I rolled my window back up and started fishing around in my back seat for a flashlight that I knew I had somewhere in my car. Then I remembered that I had it in my trunk. I popped the trunk, turned off my car, opened the door, stepped out, closed the door, got the flashlight, closed the trunk, went back to the door, and it was locked. My doors unlock when you open them, so I have no idea how the door became locked again. But it was, and like the moron I am, I still had the keys in the ignition. I knew the door should have remained unlocked, so I hadn't really thought about taking the key. Instantly, tears started to well up, because I knew I hadn't even bothered taking my phone with me. I panicked for a while. Then I remembered the campsites I had seen, and I hoped that maybe someone would have a phone that I could borrow. I started walking and fretting about waking up some poor stranger in the middle of the night, but I didn't see any other option. Each campsite I came to was completely empty. I think I checked for about 15 minutes or so before I started to get nervous about how far I was wandering from my car. I think I had to walk about a mile or so, and on the walk back, my battery started to fade on the flashlight. I was only about halfway back, and my panic reached a whole new level. For whatever reason, the parking area and my car seemed to be like a safe haven, and I started sprinting. In my panic and in the darkness, I got switched around somewhere and ended up in a dead-end campsite, even though I would have sworn that it was still on the main road. This is when the major tears started. I panicked even more and ended up at yet another campsite. I felt as if I were getting more and more lost, and I couldn't hear the water anymore, so I calmed myself and decided to stay put until morning, which I knew wasn't far away, out here in the middle of nowhere. I sat down, wrapped my arms around my legs, and proceeded to try and rocking myself into calmness. It worked pretty well, until I saw him. I had my eyes closed as I rocked, but then I heard a dull footstep. I looked up, obviously startled, and saw him standing only a few feet away. He was massive, probably around 6'4", and had a large but not fat build, like a football player or something. In hindsight, it's amazing that I hadn't heard him approaching sooner, or smelt him. For a second, all I could do was stare in horror, and gasp out incomprehensible words. Then I screamed. It only took him a second to cross the distance between us, but I didn't even have time to properly get up, before he had his hands around my throat, choking me. For reference, I'm not particularly big, 5'3" and 132 pounds. Not skinny, but not fat either. To him, I was nothing more than a little rag doll. I wasn't even sure of what was happening, but I was being jerked around by the neck and arm. His hands were huge and very pale, and every place he grasped and pulled felt like he would snap something. When the movement stopped, I was in his lap, and my head pressed against his chest, and one of his legs partially crossed over me. He was half cradling me and half grappling me. I was too dazed to make a sound, but when I tried, his hands would tighten over my throat again. I went still for a few moments, but then I felt his tongue against my throat. He smelt rancid, like beer and something decomposing. I struggled to get free, but this time he pinched my esophagus between his thumb and forefinger. It was light at first, but then he started increasing the pressure. By the time he was done, I felt like I was going to pass out. I gave up on trying to scream or get away, but he would still occasionally choke me. I sat there and simply sobbed. Then, possibly even more disturbing, he started to hum and rock me. I'm not sure why this part bothered me so much. His voice seemed higher than it should be, and his hum was rather nasally. Then, just as his humming was becoming almost frantic sounding, I saw headlights, and he stopped. Somewhere in the distance, it looked as if a car was heading our way. He also saw it, and I felt panic well up inside me, worried that he would drag me off somewhere. But he didn't. He simply let go, stood up, and walked in the opposite way of the trees. Without him supporting me, I fell back slightly and watched him walk off. The sun wasn't fully up yet, but there was enough light to make out more of him than I had been able to before. He looked as bad as he smelt. Dirty, saggy jeans, a white hoodie that was so stained that it looked brownish grey, and medium-length brown matted hair. I didn't see his face at all, because I had kept my eyes shut for the entire time. I could hear the car getting closer, and I stood up. About 30 feet away was my flashlight and where I'd been sitting, and I realized how far he'd taken me, while he pulled me around like a doll. I could see the car lights through the trees, but then they suddenly took a left, and panic set in again. I worried that he would come back if he saw the car wasn't coming to the campsite, so I started to run. I didn't even care about staying on a path or road, just so long as I could still see the car. I caught myself on a few bushes and scraped myself, falling a few times, but the pain didn't even register. I was too desperate to care. It felt like forever, and I didn't know how long I actually ran, but I eventually ended up close enough to the car that the couple inside noticed me. They stopped and the guy got out. I remember not even being able to talk. For a while, I was just shrieking at the poor guy. Before I could even tell him what happened, his girlfriend had called the police. Everything after that still seems like a blur. The couple drove into the parking area as told to do by the cops, just in case the man was still around. The sheriff's department showed up, took my statement, and took me to the nearest station, and asked for another statement, checked me for evidence, called my mother, and contacted the fire depot to break into my car for me. Just as my mum and friend arrived at the station, a sheriff's car pulls up with the man in the back seat. I was promptly pulled aside and asked to make a positive identification. It wasn't like in the movies though. They just literally brought him up next to me and asked, "This him?" Now this part still leaves me extremely emotionally confused, but it is what it is. As I looked up at him, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked ashamed, confused, and oddly vulnerable, and then his eyes started to tear up. I knew something had to be wrong with him mentally, and in a weird way, I actually felt some sympathy for him. I did confirm that it was him, but afterwards, I actually worried enough about him that I asked what would happen to him. This was where sympathy flew out the window. He was indeed mentally unstable. As I found out, he was also a convicted sex offender. Looking back on it, it seems more like a dream. My mother and friend took me back to my car, and rather than being stuck in the car with my mum, I opted to let her drive my car back, and I rode back with my friend. The entire drive back she kept drilling me for more information, but I couldn't bring myself to even speak about it. I still don't like talking about it, and I refuse to go camping again. I'm also extremely paranoid about always having my key with me when I step out of my car. Not a funny kind of ha 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 paranoid, but literally, it's now a compulsion to check, to make sure I have my key with me. I usually have to check 3 times to satisfy myself. As far as the guy goes, he was admitted to a psych hospital, and I hope he stays there. I worked in SAR in the Scandinavian mountain range, and was called out to assist with finding a family that had gotten lost. We did flybys with a helicopter, and managed to spot an abandoned campsite behind a small ridge on the side of a low mountain. I should note, this is not an extremely remote area. It's common for families to hike here, often with kids. The trails are well maintained and easy to follow. We mark the spot with a smoke canister from the helicopter and call it to the ground team before looking for a place to set down. After 20 minutes, the ground team found the site using the green smoke pillar, but no campsite. At first we thought the smoke canister had gone downhill a bit, or that the smoke had pocketed somewhere else, but they found the actual canister. We also had photos and coordinates of the campsite, which had an old backpack and some other old items. It definitely appeared abandoned, but the same site was gone when Team 3 arrived at it. Police officially called off the search, as the investigation landed on the family not wanting to be found, and seemingly had cleared out the site between us marking it and SAR arriving. This seems strange to me though. I'm not sure why they'd do that. We weren't connected to the case after, and my knowledge is that they were never, ever found. So I was with my good friend, who I have known for over 10 years, called Laura. We decided to go and drive around. She had just been okayed to drive alone, since she had a very bad issue where she would just pass out spontaneously. My job was to make sure she didn't pass out, and if she did, to take control. I got into the car with her, and we began to talk and go on our way. We decided to drive on the Blue Ridge in North Carolina. We were on the parkway for about 25 minutes, when I noticed that Laura kept looking into the mirror, as if someone was behind us. I told Laura to keep her eyes on the road, otherwise we were going to crash. She insisted there was someone following us. Being all tough, I told her no, they're not. They are just driving on the parkway like us. There are no exits for miles. Where do you expect them to go? I'm not too sure she was convinced of my answer, but we drove on for another half an hour and decided to stop at a lookout that had a store as well. Laura got out of the car and got some food whilst I waited by the car for her. That's when I noticed that this dude was watching Laura. So I walked up to Laura and told her that we needed to leave, as there was a guy looking for her. She knew what was going on and started to get scared and got back in the car and drove on. We didn't see the guy, but what I did see coming was Laura driving like she was drunk. Next thing I know, bang, we went off the road and hit the guardrail. Laura wasn't responsive, so I called 911 and told the dispatcher we were somewhere on the parkway near a certain lookout point. Not long after, I saw a car stop behind us. It was the car that had been pursuing us previously. The man got out and began to laugh and just watch me. I told him that if he wasn't here to help, for him to just leave. He got back in his car and just sat there, and I didn't want to take my eyes off him, but I had to, if I was going to be able to help Laura. It wasn't before long that the sirens was in the distance, and it was awesome to see the flashing lights come around the corner. And of course, when the man saw these, he floored it. I was in shock, and Laura was still unresponsive. The paramedics took care of her, got her out the car, and took her to the hospital, where I gave my statement to the cops about the guy. They couldn't do much since he didn't harm us in any way. When I got to the hospital, one of the paramedics noticed me and ushered me over to him. He asked me if I had passed out at all, and I told him no, and I told him no, and inquired into why he was asking. He then let me know what Laura had said to him. Laura said that the man was dangerous and was intent on killing me. I was frozen, because that was the last thing I thought Laura would have said. It's now 3 weeks later, and I was back at work since my job is a medic, and it requires me to drive the parkway and see if anyone needs help, or if a call comes through to take it. I was driving near where Laura had crashed, when I saw a car on the side of the road with flashlights. I stopped my truck, got out, and walked up to it feeling a bit afraid. I was scared that it was going to be the man. I walked up to the passenger side door and saw nobody in the car. I decided to walk around the area and see if he was around. If I found him, I was going to give him a ticket for parking in the middle of the road, and a piece of my mind for what he did to Laura. I start walking up a hill to see if he was there. I walk about 50 feet, when there was a little cabin that I knew was not supposed to be there. I called for backup and made my way up the cabin. I'm a medic and I'm not armed, so if something happened, I could only punch and kick and that's about it. I shout, "Hello? Is there anyone here needing medical attention?" I heard a noise from the cabin, and that's when I get afraid since somebody was in there. I hid behind a tree and waited for backup to come. Once the police got there, they broke down the door and there was a fist fight. The man ended up getting knocked out, and it was then my job to take care of his sorry ass. I helped carry him to the back of the truck where all my medic stuff was, and he started to wake up. I gave him water and started asking him what the hell he was doing and what his problem was, and why he tried to follow us. He didn't say anything, other than she was cute, and that he recognized her from her YouTube channel. I get a bit on end, since my friend is a YouTuber, and her voice is easy to recognize from anywhere. I asked him what he wanted to do with Laura, and he said he just wanted to kill her, so she couldn't make any more videos. I didn't know what to say because that was creepy. The police took him away, and some other officers searched the cabin. When I walked in, I was struck with shock, because the cabin had drawings of Laura naked. How did he know what she looked like naked? I told Laura, and she began to hyperventilate. She told me that she thought she had this stalker, someone who she always thought was spying on her from a distance. She only caught a few glimpses of him, but now that she managed to piece everything together, she was convinced it was that man. I hope to never see him again. And so does Laura. Wildland firefighter with the Forest Service. This story is of an old supervisor of mine. Setting is 2004 or so. Hell's Canyon area of Middle Idaho. His crew has been working all day on an emerging incident, and we're going to be working through the night as well. Being the assistant superintendent of the crew, he was out ahead scouting on an ATV or some such. He was working his way down a logging road that had clearly not been used in some time, when a bobcat, or lynx, appears in the middle of the road, but doesn't run as they usually would. Thing stands there for a good 10 seconds, screams at him, and scampers up a tree not 5 feet off the road. He finds it odd but not particularly unsettling. Just half a mile or so down the road, he finds a small cabin. Also odd, as this is federal land and no private structure should be there. Upon investigation, all the windows had been boarded shut tight, and someone had done a good job of doing so. The door now had been punched out and secured to a hole, drilled into the log frame by a chain. Someone did not want anything getting in or out. Peering through the hole in the door, he can see everything in the house is upset. This has him kind of unsettled, so he hops on the ATV and heads back up the road. Well, here is where it gets really interesting. Right where the bobcat had been, there stands a Native American woman in a badly tattered nightgown and bare feet, just standing there. He yells at her, asking her if she needs anything. She just screamed at him, the same scream as the cat before, and climbs right up the tree, faster than any human has the right to be climbing. Obviously, he nopes out of there as fast as he can. He asks the local guy about the cabin, and after asking around a little, a local Native American hears them talking and informs them that they saw a pumawa, in effect, a skin changer, a warg. Now, I would not believe most people that tried to tell me that, but this was a serious man that did not mess around. He was dead serious the 2 times I've heard him tell it, and I 100% believe in what he saw. I'm a 30-year-old male, and I work as a registered nurse. I have a few weird stories from my time working as a nurse, but this has to be the scariest thing that's happened to me. After graduating college, my friend, who is also a nurse, persuaded me to move to New Orleans with her. I am originally from the Midwest, a tiny sleepy town of less than a couple of thousand people, so New Orleans was a culture shock for me. But as a 21-year-old, I loved the party scene. We both worked the 12 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift, and we go to work and then go party. So the department I worked in was the emergency room. It was chaotic and crazy at times, but I am an adrenaline junkie, and it was a perfect fit. So it's a Friday night, and I have less than an hour left of my shift. It's been quiet, and then all hell breaks loose. I hear two women screaming as they follow the stretcher of an old man as the ambulance wheels him in. The old man looked horrible. He smelt like death, literally. He had a wound on his buttocks that was literally rotting. Not to mention he had a high fever and fluid on his lungs, and he was pretty much drowning in it. So I am assessing him, and two women are shrieking, wailing, and chanting hysterically. And the doctor tells me, and another male nurse, to get them out of there. So I nicely try to take the older woman's hand and lead her away, but she starts hitting me and cursing me in another language. My co-worker, a big linebacker-looking African-American gentleman named Andre, starts talking to her in what I now know as French Creole. Whatever he says to her and the other woman works, and they leave. We go back to helping the doctor, but when the guy codes, we do everything we can. But it wasn't enough, and he died. Andre accompanies the doctor to inform the family, and I stay back to help another nurse get ready to push the body down to the morgue. I hear screaming, and I hear security being paged. But I am not a big guy, only 5'7", and I work out and I can handle my own, so I go running to our security guards, as they were taking forever. I run to the front, and the younger woman is holding the older woman back, as she is screaming into the doctor and Andre's face. I can't even make out what they're saying. The younger woman ends up dragging her out, and I go to Andre and the doctor. Andre is sweating. He looks shook. So I ask him what the lady was saying. He tells me that she was blaming us for her husband's death. Andre tells us that she is a practitioner of voodoo, and that she cursed us and the doctor for not saving her husband. The doctor and I laugh it off, but Andre's face is stern, as he took this quite seriously, and we go off and finish the shift change. A few weeks later, I'm at work, and I see a bunch of my co-workers are crying and upset, all huddled together in a small room. The doctor who we were working with to try and save the patient the other day, unfortunately, had a massive cerebral hemorrhage and died in his sleep last night. I honestly chalked it up to a freak happenstance, but he was young and very healthy. But things happen. However, later that day, Andre catches me in the cafeteria. He tells me that the doctor died because of the curse, and that one of us was next. I'm not superstitious in the least, and I brushed it off and told him he was being silly. That day in the cafeteria was the last time I saw him alive. Later that night, he fell asleep at the wheel and plowed into incoming traffic. and after that, I quit my job at the hospital and moved back home. I went and saw my priest at my home church, and he thought I was nuts but gave me a blessing. That was 9 years ago. I still work as a nurse, but I'm living in California now. I'll never know if the accidents that killed the doctor and Andre were just coincidences, and I guess I never will. My youngest child recently came back from a camping trip with his school. While he was telling me about what a great time he had, I couldn't help but remember my weird experience wild camping in the woods. In the year 2000, I was living in my native country of England. I had just turned 23 and had just gone through a difficult breakup, losing my home and my girlfriend. Needless to say, I was pretty depressed, moping around my parents' house for a few months, whilst working in dead-end jobs. One of my older colleagues would always ask me what I had done the previous weekend, which was usually nothing noteworthy. He told me that he had gone wild camping from Friday through Sunday in a forest north of my town. The way he told the story of camping under the stars, building a fire, and getting away from it all seemed to be something I needed to do. I had always loved camping, as a young child and a teenager, but I had always been accompanied by friends or family. The prospect of camping alone filled me with intrigue and excitement for the first time in months. I asked him to specify the kind of equipment I would need and set off to the camping/outdoor store after work. My week was filled with planning and where I would go. I bought ordnance survey maps, which allowed me to identify interesting places that my colleague had mentioned and the easiest way to get there by public transport, as I didn't have a car. On the Friday, I brought the minimal amount of camping equipment with me to work and left a few hours early. I picked up my stuff and headed to the bus stop to take the bus which would leave me at the closest possible location to where I intended to camp. I can remember quite vividly the feeling of calm as the bus trundled along a small country lane. The golden lights of the evening streamed in through the windows. Feeling the warmth on my face, I felt happy, excited, and alive. The depression that I had been feeling had dissipated. At my stop, I hopped off the bus, pulling out my map and compass, and made my way towards my intended destination. The walk took me approximately 1.5 hours to find the area where I had thought about camping. It looked a bit too open for my liking, so I continued onwards for another 10 to 15 minutes, until I found a place that was more enclosed. The late afternoon and evening were uneventful. I pitched the tent, cooked some food that I had brought along with me on a little gas stove, and I laid on the grass and enjoyed the peace and quiet. I remember feeling sleepy at around 10 p.m, so I climbed into bed and read by torchlight. Around 4 hours later, at 2 a.m, I was awoken from a deep sleep by a noise in the distance directly behind my head. I felt disoriented, unaware of where I was or what the noise was. I remember thinking, why is he crying again? Half asleep, thinking it was my little brother, who I would go to when he cried late at night. Then suddenly, I belt myself upright. A shock of remembering where I was and that I wasn't with my brother. With the adrenaline pumping, I could even hear my own pulse. I strained myself to make out the noise in the distance. It was on and off, changing in duration, intensity, and volume. I told myself that it must be an animal, and this reduced the anxiety somewhat. I laid back down and checked the time on my watch. 2:15 a.m. Try as I might to fall back asleep, I must have been laying there for 15 minutes, when out of nowhere the noise started again. Closer, louder, weirder. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This time it sounded like crying, and also like they were hyperventilating. It continued for a few minutes, and then stopped. I started to wonder. Perhaps a walker got lost in the woods and became distraught. I began to hear a sort of banging sound, like someone hitting a tree with a blunt metal object. Just once at first, and then it became continuous and intense, as though someone wanted to knock down a tree with a metal bat. The noise suddenly came to a stop, and so does my breath. I hold my breath, my heart beating furiously. I suddenly feel really exposed, the flimsy tent giving no feeling of security, as I am starting to calm myself down. A blood-curdling scream echoes through the woods and in the clearing. I sit bolt upright. My instinct tells me to rip open the tent and just run in the opposite direction of where the sound originates. However, I stop myself from acting rashly. The scream was definitely of a man. Reflecting on the sound, the only way I can describe it is that it was full of rage, disgust, agony, and hopelessness, like someone in the pit of despair. Then there is total silence, and I can hear someone murmuring, like babbling coming again from my east. Again another scream, and then the man shouts, "Why? Why, Greg? Why?" This is then accompanied by the intense crying again, along with what sounds like nonsensical babbling. However, I can make out a few words, which from memory were fire, soil, and sky. I can hear this so clearly now. This meant a few things. I knew that they were moving towards a deeper part of the forest, but also that they very well may come across my tent. I hear them crying again, screaming all kinds of profanities, everything aimed at Greg. I heard the babbling get louder. At first I thought they were just speaking louder, but then I heard the breaking of twigs beneath their feet. It sounded like the person was stumbling, sometimes falling to their knees and hitting the ground with something, and getting back up. At this point, I crouched in the tent, my senses strained to hear and to sense where they are. Then it stopped. I didn't hear any more footsteps, babbling, screaming, or anything like that. It was like the man just evaporated. I remember checking my watch. It was 3 a.m. After a few minutes, I unzipped the tent in the most noiseless way possible and slipped out. I crouched on the grass beside the tent silently, surveying the area where the noise had come from. It was still dark. The moon gave some shine onto the area, and I saw absolutely nothing. There were no noises at all. I think I was crouched there for about 10 minutes, just staring. Having seen nothing, I climbed back into my tent and laid there trying to process the whole thing. The weird thing was that after some time, I remember thinking that it was over. In fact, I felt very peaceful. I must have fallen asleep at some point after this whole ordeal, as I knew the sun was up and streaming through the tent. I got up hurriedly, shoving my stuff in my backpack and getting ready to go home. I started to make my way back to the bus stop. I looked around for any signs of someone having been there that night. In my peripheral vision, I noticed what looked to be a black bag on top of a bush of ferns. Despite my experience, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went to check. It was not a bag, but an old leather bomber jacket. It was in really bad condition, but I'm sure it had not been there as I walked through there the other day. I didn't want to touch it, but I wanted to see if there was anything inside. So, I picked up a stick and flipped it over. I was shocked to see what looked like a big mallet, which is normally rubber or wood. This one was made of metal. After seeing that, I just wanted to go. I more or less ran through the woods and back to the bus stop. After reaching my town, I went to the police and informed them. As there was no real crime, they gave me a funny glance and a reference number. It's been so many years since this, but I can remember it all so vividly. The fear, the anticipation, and the terror that plagued me with every step this guy took towards me. I cannot imagine why anyone would be walking through the forest that was quite remote at 2 or 3 a.m. The whole thing was so weird that when I told my friends, they just laughed. I don't live in the UK anymore, but to the guy with a metal mallet walking through the woods in the middle of the night, please, let's never meet again. I grew up in a very small town with a population of maybe 200 people. Most of the surrounding area being cows and cornfields. Now, if you live in southern Indiana, you know there is a whole lot of meth and heroin in the area, and this place was no exception by any means. Heck, it even seemed to be more rampant since it was on the border of the Ohio River. Even with all the drugs and users in the area, it was still a pretty safe place to live, and parents really had no problem letting their children go out in the woods or hang out around a local ball game without any supervision. Anyway, I was around 5 years old when this happened in the summer of 1999. I was a little towhead lass with green eyes and a deep love for animals that I still carry to this very day. My older brother and I both had baseball games that day at our school. Mine had finished off first, so I went over to the playground nearby to go swing on the swings. Of course, I had gotten my mum's approval before heading that way. Sitting on the seat, I was kicking my legs wildly, trying to get as high as possible in the summer sun, when suddenly I see a shadow right behind me. Turning around with a smile, I figured it was my mum coming to get us to take us home. But it wasn't her. Standing a few feet behind me was a large man who was roughly 6 foot tall, with dark, deep black hair, a full beard and green eyes. "Hello there, young lady," he said with a wide grin that was missing several teeth and looked as if the rest were soon to follow suit. "I'm looking for my kitten. He's run off and I can't seem to find him. Would you please help me look?" Now, I know this was kind of stupid. My mama had always warned me about stranger danger, but this was a small town in the sticks. I was 5, and there was a lost kitty at stake. So naturally I said yes. Now the playground was right beside the baseball field and parking lot for the school, so it was all within eye reach and I felt safe. We walked around the playground and parking lot for a bit, calling in his cat, Kisses, with "Here kitty kitty," and after a while he suggested we come around the side of the school, and we went to look for the cat, which was outside their line of sight from the baseball field. Now something finally clicked in my little head, and I told him I would have to ask my mum before going over there. His eyes crinkled a bit before saying, "It will only take a few minutes to look. I'm sure she'll be okay with it." Knowing she wouldn't, I shook my head firmly and said I would be right back to help, before sprinting off back towards the baseball field. I looked around for her for about 10 minutes and couldn't find her anywhere, and I was so very worried about the poor scared cat that I stupidly went back to the side of the school to tell the man that I would continue to help looking. What do you know? He wasn't there, and neither was the single black car that was parked around the side of the school. Being a kid, I figured that he had found his cat and taken it home. Now that I'm older, I realize that the lost cat was an attempt to get me alone and out of the sight of anyone else that could see me, possibly to kidnap me, and God knows what else. Creepy dude that tried to lure me away with the tale of a poor lost kiddie. I hope we never meet again, you sick bastard. We had just moved to Denver. My roommate Tyler was gay, and this was the first time in his life that he was surrounded by other gay people. For the first few weeks, I didn't see much of him. He was going crazy with the attention, and I was content in our apartment alone. Nothing about it freaked me out. A photo on my wall had fallen off, and that was strange, but these things happen. Gravity. Tyler finally stayed the night in the apartment, and we were sharing a bed because his hadn't arrived yet. We were both drunk, and that night, as soon as I turned off the lamp, the blinds started moving. Tyler was freaked out, but I was drunk and tired, and brushed it off as just a breeze. He went and slept in the living room, and I stayed in the bedroom, and told him to chill out and that it was nothing. Nothing else happened that night, but we did bring it back up the next day. We both laughed. I said, "What should we name our ghost?" Tyler replied, "Bill." For the rest of the day, we continued to crack little jokes about Bill. That night, whilst getting into bed and about to turn the lamp off, Tyler whispered, "Bill doesn't like the dark." The blinds immediately started lashing all around us. I turned the lamp back on, and we both sat up and just watched. I still wasn't convinced. He made me get out of bed to check where it was coming from, because I wasn't scared. I looked for any type of vent or open window, but nothing made sense. I had a little radio in the windowsill, and it had fallen out. I put it back up, climbed back into bed and tried to calm Tyler. Again, I turned the lamp off. Swoosh! They started going again, but this time more intensely. I am scared. I did what anyone who thinks they might be encountering something did. I tried speaking to it. "Do you want us to leave?" The blinds were going crazy. At that point I was terrified. I jumped out of bed and packed a quick bag and headed to my childhood friend's house. I didn't sleep that night at all. The events that had transpired had left me freaked and shocked. Our next journey would be try and figure out a way to get rid of Bill. We headed back to the apartment because we needed the internet to find an exorcist. I went to the house shaking in fear, sitting in a corner of the house. Tyler called a few churches, but we didn't get any help. We actually got really confused responses. Tyler stands up and looks into the kitchen. He covered his mouth and slowly walked backwards. The burners were on, all of them, on different settings. I ran out of the house. Tyler followed behind, but did turn the burners off. We sat in the car panicking. "We have to call the leasing office and get out of this lease," I said. That was an awkward phone call. The manager didn't believe us and thought we were idiots, but I told her everything. She said she would look into it and call us back. "I left the cigarettes in the house," Tyler cried, but there was no way that I was going back in there. But he talked me into standing by the door whilst he grabbed them. This time, all the water sources were on. Every sink and shower in the apartment. I'm hysterical at this point. How can this be happening? I run to the car, but he insists that we have to turn the water off. I collect myself and walk to the door again with him. Perfect timing. 2 leasing ladies came down because we were the talk of the office. I asked her to please turn the water off because we were too afraid. We all stood inside by the front door. and told them the whole story. One of them put her hand over the burner. They're still warm. We were insisting that we didn't make it up, and I wasn't sure if they believed us or not. Well, not until the maintenance guy encountered Bill. Todd, as the maintenance guy was called, apparently after we left, him and his co-workers were walking past the apartment, and he said he was laughing with him about our story. Right when he walked by our apartment, the deadbolt locked, and he said they looked at each other, and then he grabbed his keys. No one was supposed to be in there, so that was weird. He knocked on the door for a while, assuming that we'd come back, but no one came. So he stuck his set of keys into the door, and it felt like someone was holding the deadbolt shut, and he couldn't open it. He then tried the balcony door, as we were on the first floor, and that wouldn't unlock either. He tried again with the front door, and it unlocked easily. At that point, the office actually believed us, and they allowed us to move into a different apartment. The next day sucked. I had to repack again, but I couldn't stay in the house because I was just terrified to death, and we spent the entire day moving. And I laid on the dining room floor with the boy who liked me. It honestly just felt good to be held, as I cried in his arms. I watched the blinds slowly close by themselves, and I cried. Moving didn't help. We did all of that shit for nothing, and now I'm in a layout that I hate. We continue to try and find a way to get rid of Bill ourselves. This included blacking out every night and mocking it. We bought some more sticker decal to decorate our rooms. He bought a big Paris sticker, and he put it on the wall in his room, and it got torn off, and we put it right back up, and it peeled off. I thought it could just be the wall paint at first, and I was trying to think logically. Fortunately, nothing else happened on that first day. Shit escalated. Bill would pound on our bedroom door wall from the minute we laid our heads down to try and sleep. Every night, it wouldn't let us rest. I even laid by the wall to make sure it wasn't Tyler messing around with me. One night, my upstairs neighbor came down very upset. It was super fun to try and explain to the neighbor that it wasn't us banging on the wall, it was some sort of demon arsehole. I even brought him into the room. He saw it with his own eyes and said, "It must be a raccoon in your wall." A raccoon, yeah. People really don't want to believe in ghosts. It messed with us to the point that we were scared and couldn't sleep. It would change the shower water to scalding hot, throw lit candles off the counter, and all kinds of annoying crap. But things started to get worse, and Tyler finally saw it. I couldn't find him. It was almost bedtime, so he was going around the house turning off the lights. I didn't see him again. "Tyler?" No response. "Tyler, where are you? Why are all the lights off?" I turned the bedroom light on, and he was in bed, bundled up, completely covered. "What are you doing?" He wouldn't look at me. "Tyler, what happened?" I was getting afraid. "I saw him. I was so scared. I can't explain what kind of fear I felt." "Where?" I tried comforting him, and he was crying. "In the bathroom. I went to turn off the light, and he was right there. He had no eyes." We both sat up in the corner of the bedroom all night. We did act like total idiots, and let our friends stay the night, and they didn't believe us. We would mock it, watch it thrash around mirrors and bang the walls, and they would stare in awe. God, we were really stupid. We couldn't do this anymore. We needed help. I wrote to a ghost hunter show, and she wanted to fly out and film if things escalated, but I couldn't wait. She referred me to a local guy who specialized in stuff, called Zach. We met with Zach at a local diner, and explained everything. He came up to the house, but didn't sense anything. Not a thing. He told us that it was unlikely that it was a ghost, given the way that it felt, but that we are inflicted with a voodoo curse from staying in the original apartment, and the entity has now attached itself to us. I didn't fully comprehend what that meant, but I knew it was real, and he gave us directions on how to get rid of it. He told us to get salt and some other things and put them in bowls in the corner of every room in our house. He told us to burn sage around all of the windows and doors, and to yell, "Get out," but not to take it lightly. No laughing. We had to mean it. He said if anything new happened, to document and report it to him. He told us to never acknowledge or talk to it in the house, and he said to never, ever give it a name. So that night, my childhood friend and her boyfriend and Tyler and I all began the process. No one laughed. The energy around us was so tense and silent. We did what we had to do, and we went out for pizza. The things only awoke the beast even more. We got home late, and I went to the bathroom. The bowl of salt had been flipped over. I was confused, and went to check the others. They were all flipped over. We put the sage in a kitchen drawer when we left, and when we got home, the sage was shredded all over the floor. Later that night, Tyler and I were on the couch watching TV, when he starts crying and pointing to the kitchen. "Look, in the kitchen." I didn't see anything. "He's right there. Can't you see him?" "No." Thank God I couldn't, because I didn't know if my heart would be able to handle that. But as soon as Tyler would look away, or blind, he said that Bill would disappear. He was scared and asked me to please get him a soda. I didn't want to, but the fear was palpable. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed it. One of the salt bins, the big one, was ripped open, and the salt that had spilled out was neatly written the word "die." I was freaking out, and I took a picture of it and sent it to Zach. He replied, "I've never seen anything like that before." We felt like we were doomed forever, that we were hexed. I had so many fears that Bill would kill Tyler, and there would be no real explanation, and I'd go to prison for life. I felt like my life was over. This thing controlled everything in our reality. The next night, shit continued to hit the fan. It was always more active at night. Eventually, daytime events ceased completely. We both laid down to go to sleep, when Tyler got hit in the forearm with a glass ashtray. He cried. Scary thing is that it was aimed at his head, and his forearm stopped it from being hit. We bundled up under the mountain of blankets whilst it threw books off the shelf in my room, and then threw some cheap-ass end tables from Walmart at us. Tyler sat up and put it back on the ground. It continued to throw the table though. There were holes in the walls from that night, and I grabbed Tyler's hand to reassure myself it wasn't him doing it. It wasn't. And this is when shit got really messed up. It threw the table one more time. This time, it was on me. It was like it was pushing me, like something was pressing into me. I squeezed Tyler's hand, and he peeked out. He's on top of me. But the table was on top of me, not him. I was confused. "Push him off," he said and looked at me. And I said, "I'm going to push him off and run. Grab my arm and close your eyes." I did. I didn't want to see it. I was so scared. As Tyler pushed it off, the strangest thing happened. I was slightly peeking because I wanted to see but didn't, but still did. I saw Tyler push an invisible force off himself. He was pushing what appeared to be nothing. The table on top of me flew off towards where Tyler was pushing. and it was like he could see it, but I could only see it in objects. It was insane. We ran out and left the house and slept in the car. We weren't allowed to talk about anything in the house, so shit would just go down. I was lying on the couch facing the wall trying to nap, and the screen door slams open and shut. "Why did you slam the door open and shut?" I asked, annoyed. "It didn't," he replied. "Oh." That was the gist of our conversation about the house. Some days we would leave the house and talk about the things it did to us that day that we had to keep quiet about. Tyler was showering one day, and I sat in the bathroom with him. We never ever really separated. We were too afraid to be alone. He got out of the shower and had 3 cut marks in a row on his right thigh. They looked like demon claws. Tyler saw him one more time. He pointed to the door in the living room. "Look, can you see him right there?" I saw nothing, but I watched the deadbolt lock swing with force where he was pointing. It was chilling. We threw a party one night, and Tyler was in the laundry room, rocking on the floor crying. Oh my god, what happened? It's like he was punched in the chest. He was holding it and lifted his shirt. It looked like someone had punched him directly in the chest. Fast forward to us smoking on the balcony. This was the most evidence I'd ever gained. It was the clearest thing I ever saw it do. The sliding glass door slowly closed right in front of my face. It felt good to know that I'm not insane. It was very real. That night, me and Tyler had a huge fallout. He had really annoyed me, and I was pretty sure this was going to be the end of our friendship. He was going to move back to our hometown that following week, and Zach called me to catch up on the latest paranormal activities. I told him Tyler was leaving, and he said, "Well, I think things will be pretty quiet when he leaves. I think it's attached to him." Zach sent his entities to guard the house to see if any new spirits or whatever were entering. He said they reported back and that they saw nothing new. None of this makes sense to me, and I have a hard time grasping what he does in truth. He told me he thought it was attached to Tyler, and everything pointed to that being correct. He was the only one who could see it. He was the one it attacked, and he was the one it hurt. It never attacked me personally. Once Tyler moved out, everything stopped. I can't explain this. I can't make this shit up. I suppose there must be a part of Tyler that I didn't really know. I came to believe that at some point in Tyler's past, he must have got involved with voodoo. And that's why this voodoo demonic entity had attached itself to him. From this day, I will never, ever go anywhere near anyone or anything involved with voodoo. That stuff is real, and having experienced it firsthand, I never want to have to go through anything like that again. I was sad to see Tyler go after the falling out in truth, but I am so glad to be free of all that crap. We've since lost contact. I hope he's managed to resolve his hex, and that the entity following him leaves him be, for his sake. This story is from a friend of mine, told to me almost 8 years ago. Missy was a wonderful person, who was always giving and kind to everyone around her, as well as always being cheerful. We had met through our interests of art, and got along great. When I lived near Missy, she and I had lunches and went on art walks together twice a month. We got on the topic of travel. Missy loved traveling. She had traveled to so many places around the world: India, Egypt, Syria, Brazil, China, and many more. In the late 70s to mid 80s, Missy's father was some sort of salesperson, and he had the opportunity to take his family along with him, consisting of his wife, Missy, and Missy's 2 older sisters, with her being the youngest, while she was the ages between 9 and 12. I always love a close encounter story. People who have stories like this have a strong sense to stay alert and protect their friends and family swiftly when the time calls for it. So I asked her, were you ever frightened as a child to be travelling around like that? I mean, even our own backyards can be dangerous, but when you're a foreigner, it can be 10 times more scary. Missy replies, oh yes, the Middle East is the first to come to mind, as the most unnerving for my sisters and I at the time. Don't get me wrong, the country is so beautiful, and many people were generally kind and welcoming towards my family and I, but some places weren't nice at all. More than once, it was better for my mother and sister and I to have our father and a second male escort to shuttle and walk us around the city and markets. It was also better for us to wear headscarves quite frequently. A man would reach out and pull our scarves off our hair. As soon as we'd readjust, they would be pulled again. As children with blonde hair, pale skin and blue eyes, we 3 were quite a unique curiosity, or considered prostitutes despite our young age. Standing in one place was almost as dangerous. Men would walk by and touch us inappropriately, or even flash their genitals at us. Our mother literally had us tied wrist to wrist just in case. As we were getting ready for our departure by airplane, I remember a creeper who couldn't do anything but stare at me. I don't know why, but it was only me who he was leering at. So, continuing to board our plane, the creepy guy boards along behind my family. I tried to stay close to my sisters and mother, and unfortunately the plane was becoming full to the point I had to sit away from my family. My father and mother were 2 seats behind me, and my sisters to the left of me, and the creeper was right in front. I was really happy the man could not stare at me anymore, and the first hour or 2 of the flight were calm. I was reading a book to fill the time. As I was continuing to settle in and rest my eyes, I felt it, a stroking motion on my leg. I looked down to see the man reaching behind his chair and stroking my leg. How staff members or another adult or stranger hadn't noticed is beyond me. At the time, I was just a frightened child. My sisters had noticed and watched in horror, also not knowing what to do, as they didn't want to get into trouble or being shamed of accusing for lying to adults. So as the man continued to touch me, I'd kick him as much as possible for more than 2 hours. On and off this went on. When we landed, the man was in the front of the line. My sister and I rushed to our parents, pointing in almost hysterics about him. I caught sight of the man one last time, and he looked worried because he was caught, and he booked it into the crowd. As soon as my mother was able to make sense of our distress, she was genuinely concerned and alerted a security guard. But there was nothing that could be done really. The man was gone, and we continued on our way to the next destination. Fortunately, Missy had more positive experience than bad ones, and her family continued to travel for many years. But as a young child, being touched inappropriately, and people getting away with whatever they want as someone so young, boils my blood and horrifies me. To that sick man, I hope you got what was coming to you, and I hope you never bumped into Missy again. So, in North Carolina, there is a small town the army brought to use for training. They replaced the doors and electricals, but everything else they let go to shit. Which was very cool because the main house is over 100 years old. So, it was getting to the part of the day where it's not dark, but the trees make it really shadowy, so you can still see fairly well. So it's a group of 7 of us going to explore the house. First interesting thing. So I drove the second car with 3 other people. Legend has it that people would lose their keys and they would end up sitting on the hood of their car or in the door. So I very scientifically and deliberately waited until everyone was out of all the doors and they were properly closed. I then hit the lock on the key fob and everyone hears and sees that lock, and I check the doors. Remember this for later. We all ended up splitting into smaller groups, and I ended up alone. My wife and her friends go back around, and I stayed out front walking around and scanning the woods. They then come back, which is when they tell me they heard what sounded like 2 little girls laughing and playing in the woods. So I started walking around with the flashlight scanning the woods. When we get back, the dome light was on, and one of the doors was cracked open on the Jeep. I shit you not. This starts to freak everyone out. As we're discussing this, we hear the loudest thud come from the house. I compared it to someone dropping a safe on the top floor of the house. It literally shook the house, and I heard the bass in my chest. Now being prior military, I know for a fact this wasn't artillery or ordnance. The rest of our friends that were in the house beat feet and we got into the car and left. No one can explain the noise. They were all upstairs and looked in a bedroom, and then when they went into the next room, the boom came from behind them. We also talked to our friends years later, expecting them to say it was a joke and they had done something, but they stood to their story. When I was in college, I rented a studio apartment in San Francisco. It was actually pretty decent, but instead of facing the street, my windows looked out onto a light well that housed garbage dumpsters and trash chutes. Because of this, my fire escape wasn't a balcony with a drop-down ladder, but a permanent metal staircase that led to a door to the bottom of the light well that emptied out into an alley at the back of the building. The window to the fire escape was right next to my futon, on the floor of course because college. One night, when my boyfriend at the time was visiting from out of town, we had some drinks and smokes and fell asleep with the window open. During the night, I awoke from the cold, and as I turned to close the window, I was confronted by a blank leering face. In my sleepy stupor, I blurted out, "What the hell?" and he promptly scurried away. I slammed the window shut, closed the curtains and woke up my boyfriend, trying to convince him of what I saw. But he assumed it had just been a bad dream on my part, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I found a broom on the fire escape that wasn't there before, as proof that I hadn't imagined the encounter. At this point, I should explain that my apartment building was in downtown San Francisco, very close to the Tenderloin, so the next instance is probably not related. But at the time, my brain reacted as if it were. So a few months later, I'm alone in my apartment, cooking myself dinner, when I come out of the kitchenette to see a crazy looking dude on the fire escape again. This time I jolt towards the window, swearing like a schizophrenic pirate and flailing my limbs so much that my hand shatters the window and he frantically runs down the fire escape and into the alley. After he ran, I looked down and noticed lots of bright red spots on the floor and realized that the window had sliced my wrist open. I bandaged myself up, called my parents in San Jose, and sat in a chair with a chef's knife facing the window. until my mum drove up and kept me company until morning. I really should have moved house. A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia's trail a shot. It's about 166 miles long and runs through Washington State and Jefferson National Forest from Roanoke Country to Perrysburg in Giles Country. This is definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to go home to our own beds. It was early October, and the changing of the leaves and colours were amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just your typical hike. But our last couple of nights is where things got strange. You are supposed to camp on the trail or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night. So we decided to ignore those suggestions and find our own little spots off the trail. A little searching around, and we found a spot a little ways off the trail in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up camp, cooked some food, and spoke for a while, then snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m, I was awoken by my girlfriend shaking me awake, telling me to get my gun, that someone was walking around outside our tent. She informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside the tent, running a knife or something along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know what exactly or who you might run into when hiking on such a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack, and then we silently sat, listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, and then I heard the crunching of twigs. Someone or something was walking in the woods behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. Our fire had gone out, so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated by only the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put whilst I checked it out. I didn't flick the flashlight on right away, so to not give away that I was out of the tent, and have it becoming a shining beacon of my location. Instead, I waited to hear more noises. After a few minutes, it sounded bipedal-based, and on the way the steps were placed. I turned on the flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to go away, and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn, and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then, from my right, I hear what sounds like someone running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way, and then, from the original spot, hear who or whatever there was take off into the woods. There's no way I'm giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened, and I ended up sitting guarding outside the tent until darkness became daybreak. In the morning, I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was, and I discovered a boot print in some soft, moist dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine or my girl's, and this freaked me out, as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself, because I didn't want to freak out my girl any more than she already was. At this point we were still pretty deep in, and still had 2 days left. That day we walked a little faster than normal, and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to setting up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up until this point, I had a feeling we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this, as I hadn't seen or heard anyone else. But it was just a gut feeling. We set up camp and made some food, then retreated to the tent. I gave my girl the 1911, and I kept the judge next to me, and I assured her that if I slept at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while she drifted off to sleep, and I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the wood at night. I was awake for a few hours, just wanting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, I guess, my exhaustion caught up with me, and I drifted off. I awoke sometime later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside our tent. I grabbed my gun and woke up my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of our fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. So I yelled, "We're armed, get out of here!" And they dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. Our stuff was thrown about the place. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our things, and I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction where the person was running to. There was a creek nearby, and I walked to the edge, where there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek, I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up, whatever she could, and that we were leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items, and headed back on the trail, in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people talking off in the woods, and heard branches snap for quite some way. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was going to jump us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a long way from civilization, and quite literally on our own, since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time. I really felt like we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time, and when I heard something in the woods behind us, as we rounded a corner, I turned around and saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up, and barely any light. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second, and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us, and then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back frequently, but we didn't see them again. My gut told me they were there for quite a ways though. We eventually reached the edge of the trail, and got to where we'd parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was just someone messing with us. Maybe it really was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. And I will never know, because I will not be returning to find out. I go to a local fishing pond on my lunch break for half an hour and usually catch a couple of bass. Today, I thought I caught a turtle or something heavy, because it was just dead weight. But my braid held up, and what I caught was a real surprise. It was a sealed mason jar. I couldn't make out the content, because the liquid inside the jar was pretty dark, but it looked to be a piece of plaid cloth. A curious couple walked by asking about it, and I told them to have it, assuming the contents were just junk. They smashed the jar and started prodding around with a stick to uncover the contents. They unwrapped the plaid cloth to see a small voodoo doll, bound in yellow yarn or string, and 2 forms of ID cards face to face. You couldn't see the info. One was a New Jersey license, and I'm not sure about the other. Both cards were bound together with the same yellow string and yarn that the doll had wrapped around it. The cards were not taken apart to get any form of ID. I didn't touch any of it. It appeared to be some kind of black magic or voodoo, and I noped out of there. About 3 months ago, my dad and I were in Puerto Plata. We were staying at the Iberostar, and when we got there, we realized we were right near the end of this strip of resorts. We were told not to walk to the beach too far, because at a certain point, it was the locals' area, and you were no longer on resort property. Therefore, they couldn't offer you as much protection. Everyone we met was very nice. We met loads of locals and had no problems. Our room was at the end of the resort by the beach, a great room. On the first night we went for a walk on the beach at around 11 and saw a lot of crabs. I love moving animals, and me loving animals wanted to get some pictures of them, but it started raining, so we went back to the room for bed. The next night, we walked the beach at around 11:30, so we walked for about half hour, and I got some pictures, and we're starting walking back to our room. Right before our room, there was a large area covered with palm trees in the sand. I was looking down at the camera, reviewing my pictures when my dad said, "Did you see that?" I said, "No, what?" He said, "There's a guy hiding right there. Look behind you." I looked and saw a tall, skinny man hiding beside the palm tree, keeping his body hidden, because it's in the shadows. His hood covered his head, so I couldn't tell if he was white or brown or whatever. He had something shiny in his hand though, that was reflecting some light from somewhere. We went back to the room and watched as he stood there for almost half an hour. Then we called hotel security. All they really said to him was, "You're not supposed to walk on the beach at night." I'm pretty sure he had a knife, and I wonder what would have happened if I were out there alone. So creepy. This story occurred in the summer of 2008. I grew up in Oregon and was acquainted with the outdoors at an early age. My favorite hobby came to be hiking, particularly in areas that are either very dangerous or isolated. The health benefits of hiking were secondary to the thrills of walking the edges of exposed cliffs, being in cougar and bear territory, and knowing that I was far from help. Into the Wild was released in the fall of 2007, and I immediately fell in love. Being a high school senior, I could barely go another week living in my parents' house. The movie spoke to my sense of adventure and inspired me to hike the California portion of the Pacific Crest Trail upon graduation. I made it from the Mexico border to Northern California without much incident. I saw rattlesnakes and black bears, experienced dehydration, but nothing happened that made me fear for my life. Somewhere in the Larsen National Forest in Northern California, I walked around a bend in the trail, only to be startled by two people sitting on a rock, dressed in nearly all white. Their faces were dirty, their appearance disheveled, and the man had a long, unkempt beard. Both seemed to be in their 40s. They looked like the couple who kidnapped Elizabeth Smart. What struck me as odd about the encounter was encountering anybody at all. I frequently went days without seeing a single human being. Their white clothes could be explained away by the need to escape the California summer sun. Their scruffy appearance could be explained away by the fact that most thru hikers abandoned personal hygiene on the trail. After I said hello, they said nothing and simply watched me as I passed. I didn't even find it odd. I chalked it up to them being foreign and not knowing what to say. I camped a few hundred yards off the trail that night, as I always did, following bare precautions. I hung the leftover food I had cooked that night from a tree, approximately 5 feet off the ground, packing up camp in the morning. I noticed the food wasn't there. I immediately thought a bear had entered my campsite, and so I began to look for paw prints. I didn't find paw prints, but I did find boot prints circling the campsite. 2 pairs of them. One of those prints led right up to the rope from which the food was hanging. I thought of the couple I had passed earlier, and everything clicked. I quickly packed up and left. My mind was racing the entire day, but I figured the couple were simply hungry. If they had nefarious intentions, they would have come for more than the food. Several days passed and my mind was at ease again. I had begun to circle my campsite with sticks to wake me up in the event of an intruder, animal, or otherwise. I awoke in my tent one night to the sound of those sticks crunching. I grabbed my hunting knife and tried to relax by telling myself that I was in the middle of nowhere and that the source of the noise is much more likely an animal than a person. Then I heard frantic whispering. It was impossible to tell from which direction the voices were coming from. Being in the dark, surrounded by trees, 100 miles from the nearest city plays tricks on your senses. I debated yelling out, claiming to have a gun, but instead decided to be silent and retain the benefit of surprise. I heard footsteps circling my tent and was ready to slash at whatever opened it. But just like that, it was over. No more footsteps, no more whispering. I lied awake, frozen, until sunrise, and I opened my tent to find no one there. The only evidence of anything happening was a boot print, and it was the same as before. Several more days passed, and I was now in Shasta National Forest, probably 50 to 70 miles from where I first encountered the couple. The trail became more or less a goat trail, being on the side of a mountain and above the tree line. I could see the trail winding for miles in front and behind me. I stopped for water in the rare shade and noticed 2 hikers miles behind me. All I could see were 2 white dots moving along the mountainside. I immediately shouted as loud as I could, "Screw this, this trip is over." I pulled out my map and looked for the nearest town, which happened to be Castella, located off I-5. The only problem was that it was 25 miles away. I hiked well into the night, trying to gain as much ground as possible. I kept losing the trail and decided to set up camp, this time far off the trail and into the forest. I got into my tent and tried to sleep, but every little noise woke me up. After a few hours in my tent, I heard the telltale signs of another bad night. The footsteps, the whispering, the sticks breaking. Sound travels far in the absence of other sounds. I knew they were close, but wasn't sure how close. All I could think of was, This is messed up. So messed up. Finally, a flashlight hits my tent and lights up the entire thing, and then goes dark. I unzip my tent carrying a knife, yelling nonsense in the dark. It was sort of like that cliche scene in movies where people in the wilderness hear sticks breaking around them, and the camera pans around the trees because people have no idea which direction the sound is coming from. Then I heard footsteps running towards the tent and barely made out a figure moving in my peripheral vision. I turned and ran deep into the forest. I tripped several times and ran into several trees, and after running for approximately 5 minutes, I tripped, rolled, and came to rest near a downed tree. I got under the tree trunk and laid still. I saw the flashlight moving around the distance. I laid under the tree for hours. I was certain that they were gone, but I didn't move. Eventually birds started chirping and I knew sunrise would come. Once it did, I made my way back onto the trail, abandoned my campsite, and walked the rest of the distance to Castella, where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses I-5. I hitchhiked my way to the town of Mount Shasta and spoke with the police and forest service. They put me up in a motel for the night, and my parents drove from Oregon to collect me the next day. I followed up with the forest and police several months later, who told me they had similar reports of items disappearing from campsites throughout the surrounding national forest. However, there had been no other reports of the terrorizing that I experienced. As far as I know, nothing ever came of the couple. What lurks in the dark? That's what us humans are always scared of, from the moment we are able to think and comprehend what is happening. To me, the darkness was never one of fright, but not one of happiness either. But that all changed on a cold winter night a few years ago. For context, at the time, I was a lanky but strong 6-foot-tall teenager. This will be important later. Also, the area that I lived in had next to no crime. The only thing you'd see would be a drug dealing in high school and such. Now for the story. It was a bone-chilling night in January, and I was home alone with my golden retriever, Dusk. He looks as his name suggests, golden and beautiful, but was friendly to everyone. I was upstairs playing Xbox, while Dusk was sitting next to me napping. I was totally into my game, and didn't even realize it was creeping into the wee hours of the night, around 1 or 2 a.m. But suddenly, a thud got my attention. Dusk immediately rose from his slumber and went towards my room. I followed closely behind and froze when I saw him barking at my walk-in closet door. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't think straight. Nonetheless, I quickly looked to grab my baseball bat that I always left on my dresser. My blood ran cold. It wasn't there. At this moment, I'm sure you're all thinking, why didn't you call the cops or let your 110-pound dog look into the closet? Well, firstly, I was a stupid 14-year-old who thought I could do anything, and this is what I did. I told my dog to stay and bark. Yeah, that's what I said. I know it sounds stupid, but I ran downstairs and went for the biggest knife I could find. As I was coming back up, my dog's barking became ferocious and throaty. As fast as I could, I ran up and opened the door to find nothing. As I realized it had been a false alarm, I sighed and closed the door. However, my dog didn't stop barking. and I decided to let him stand there and do whatever. I went back to playing games on the Xbox. But not even 5 minutes had passed, and I mentally slapped myself. My closet was the accessible entrance to the attic. I sprinted to my closet and quickly flicked the light on in the attic. But no maniacal laughs followed. Only silence. Even my dog stopped barking. The 10 steps it took to climb the ladder up to the attic felt like an eternity. As I approached eye level with the landing of the unfinished attic, I saw a skinny, creepy-looking middle-aged man run to the far corner, open up a solitary window, and jump out. My mouth was agape, but I managed to make it to the window to see the man hobble away into the woods, with what looked to be like an axe in his hands, and my bat on the ground near the window. I was shocked in silence, and I couldn't do anything for a while. When I finally came to my senses, I dialed 911 and explained it to them. The operator was very kind and was patient with my ramblings, and ended up sending 2 squad cars to my address. I gave my statement and they left. I was shocked. They barely checked out the surrounding area and said that it was too late and left. Once my parents and brother came home, they were profoundly alarmed with the story I told them. But we shrugged it off and got the windows fixed and changed all the locks for the house. Not even a month later, we were all eating dinner whilst watching the 5 o'clock news, and there was a news story about a man breaking into multiple homes in our town and even injuring an elderly couple while stealing their valuables. I didn't pay much attention until they showed his mugshot. When I saw it, I froze in my tracks. It was the very same man that was in my attic. I was solo backpacking and decided to stop for the night, as it was right around sunset. I got everything set up, and I heard a car on the road about 1,500 feet from my position. Honestly, I didn't even realize there was a road there, because it was up a steep embankment and I couldn't see it. So I hear this car, then it slows, then it stops, then the doors open and close and the car drives off. I hear a group of men talking, but they were too far away to make out what they were saying. By now, the sun has set, and the men begin using flashlights. They appear to be descending the steep embankment towards me. I am a little concerned, as nothing about this is adding up. I figure if they get any closer, I'll try to quietly escape and leave my gear. They stop about halfway down, and then they start digging with shovels. Now I'm shitting myself. They dig for about an hour, and then stop. Then I hear the car return. They begin to ascend up the embankment, but before they do, they shine their flashlights down to my position. I don't move a muscle, and they didn't seem to notice me. I just sat there and didn't move for at least an hour after they'd left. I packed up and moved about a quarter of a mile deeper into the woods and went off the trail, just in case they had seen me and were going to come back for me. The next day, I hiked out, found a park ranger, and gave him a map that I had drawn of the area and where the digging had taken place. He asked me to accompany him to the spot, but I refused. To give you some explanation and background knowledge for the whole encounter, I was 15 at the time. I was camping out in the middle of nowhere with my family and part of my extended family. My aunt, uncle, and cousins. I was the eldest kid in the RV, so you can probably understand how it felt to have no one else to do stupid crap I did back then with. With a good 2-year gap between me and the inferiors, it was almost like nirvana when I got out to the campground to meet with other teenagers. These were all people we knew fairly well from previous camping trips, so it was considered normal to hit it off with them from the start and act like we'd known each other forever within the hour. My parents trusted me a lot. I liked my fun, but I liked getting home in time for dinner equally as much. So when I was gone most of the day with other people from the camp, they didn't think much of it. The only rule was that I had to be back in the RV to eat dinner, and before 8:30 in the evening. So picture this. Group of 6 teenagers. We're all between 15 and 16, out in the middle of the woods, with no adult supervision for the vast majority of the day. Just a recipe for success right there. But on this particular day, we found a neat little deer trail that we hadn't found in 2 years. We thought we'd been there before, but on second thought, it didn't really seem like a deer trail. It snaked through a really thick part of the underbrush. Maybe 30 centimeters of clear ground, and 3.5 feet clear of branches going upwards. It's a really hard thing to pick out of the brush, unless you're either really looking or know where it is. It was promptly explored, marked by a broken branch outside the entrance, and quickly forgotten. Except, I remembered this special little tunnel. That night, whilst we were all eating dinner, one of the adults proposed that we played manhunt out in the woods at night. Not everyone was totally on board with this idea, but in the grand scheme of the plan, they were quashed down like autumn leaves. Everyone got a flashlight, and everyone was assigned a team. For those of you who don't know what manhunt is, here is an explanation. Everyone playing is given a flashlight, and they are divided into 2 groups. It's basically glorified flashlight tag, but there's a catch. As you catch people, you have to correctly identify who they are, and if you can, they join forces with the hunters. The last one standing gets a candy bar or something, whatever is being offered up as a prize. This is how we play it anyway. For the first round, I get lumped in with the runners, who are getting chased by the hunters. We get a 5-minute head start to run, climb a tree, whatever the hell we want to do to evade. Usually, I'm the one up the tree, but that never really worked out being the winning spot. So, to try and score a win for once, I decided to play the cat and use one surefire method of escape. And the hiding spot was the rude little path towards the thicket. It took most of the head start time to find the damn thing, because it was so well hidden and out the way. As I passed hiding spots, I heard hushed, smothered whispers between siblings who were questioning my actions, like a bird's wings rustling when it's ruffling itself. It should be noted that I have bat hearing. My ears are probably my greatest asset in the game. But when I'm just reaching the destination, I hear the short blast of the air horn announcing that time's up. I swan dive into this little path in the undergrowth, shuffling on my hands and knees until I'm about halfway in, crouching down like some huge malformed quail. The hunters are doing an initial sweep through the trails, looking for obvious hiders, and people caught out trying to change spots. When they finally reach me, they reach for the dead end and go straight back. I try to readjust myself and crawl further down the tunnel. I honestly don't know how it happened, but I found an even more hidden path within that one, and accidentally, I dragged my stupid body down the rabbit hole. except instead of ending in a dead end, this one ended in a slight hollow. I don't ever want to describe exactly what I found there, but it was a younger looking naked woman, covered in lacerations and stab wounds in the fetal position. Her glassy glazed eyes seemed to look straight through me. I was too scared to scream, and I froze there while dark burgundy stains formed on my jeans. I froze there in a pseudo-catatonic position like a marble carving for what felt like hours. And then I heard someone else coming along the path. Have you ever been so scared that one moment, that one insane moment, you truly consider something incredibly stupid as a viable option to escape? That was one of those times. I let out a short, trembling whimper and started moving. Whoever was on the path stopped, and they eagerly started moving forward again. I could hear their panting, uneven breaths of a man, a horrible marker of whoever it was getting closer and closer to me by the second. By some wondrous, beautiful miracle, he missed the path leading into the brushy hollow, and I heard him moving down past the entrance, dragging something clunky and awkward behind him. I heard clinking noises, and the occasional effort to silence the small, sharp noises. I heard a low curse, somewhere towards the end of the tunnel, and I blasted out of the undergrowth tunnel like a bullet forcing its way out of a barrel. Cracks, crashes, and obnoxious rustling were all around me, as I heard the man sharply intake a breath and begin to move towards me. The hoarse, steep panting was getting closer and closer now, a testament as how I was exiting too slowly. Somehow, I exploded out of the entrance, got onto my wobbly, half-asleep legs, and started booking it down the trail. The unknown pursuer was close behind me for a bit, but it seemed like he was too exhausted to chase me at the same speed for long. I know everyone loves to rip on the fact that people always trip in horror movies, but in all honesty, tripping is something I'm amazed I didn't do. With adrenaline coursing through me at the speed of Usain Bolt, trying to make my jello-like unsteady walking appendages work to move me away from whatever was behind me, was like trying to run on water. It felt like an eternity, but I finally reached the main trail, running back to camp, and sprinted down it screaming bloody murder. Confused faces looked out from the trees, and I think someone called after me. Reaching the camp was easy, but trying to explain why I woke half the people up in the camp and bolted out of the woods at breakneck speed was harder. When I finally choked the words out to explain, I remember a profound, insidious silence throughout the group of adults, waiting at the mouth of the trail. I don't really remember a whole lot from that point on. I know the cops were called, and my mother and aunt ran shrieking and wailed along the trail, calling for the other kids to come back to safety. When someone is yelling like that, you don't ignore it. They rounded everyone up in about 30 seconds and barreled back into camp. The police found a man out in the woods, creeping along the trail clutching a knife, a black garbage bag with a plethora of sharp instrument, and a saw was found abandoned on the trail, some speckled and smeared with dried blood. I don't think there's really any getting over it. I still have nightmares sometimes of the man chasing me, breathing heavily down the back of my neck, trying to catch me. Sometimes he succeeds. I was in San Francisco helping for an event for one of the beaches a few years ago, and one of the side projects they had going on was clearing the wooded area that was an old bunker hill back before World War I believe for some machine gun post. Needless to say, for the main bunker, You had to slide through a small slit of the structure, and it went down into a second level that was only one way. So a group of people and I enter and go down into what can only be described as a dark hotel corridor with side rooms and a crumbling infrastructure. If this wasn't creepy enough, on the first wall was written in graffiti, "Satan awaits." So we go down to the basement type level, and all the rooms are pretty far gone from age and weathering. We come upon the room labelled 6, and this room's door frame was graffitied, clown-esque design, on the only room with some type of graffiti besides the word upstairs, so it's pitch black, and we all have our camera flashlights on to see this room. It has 3 voodoo dolls on the wall, with each of them having a 6 in the middle of the body, and the words on the right saying, "Until the light takes us." This sent everyone into a, "oh my god, I don't want to be here anymore" kind of vibe. So we finish up for the most part, and make our way down to the end of the winding corridor, and at the end is a large metal door with a small peephole. And the metal door wouldn't open due to rust. It was freaking weird. I never want to go back there again, let alone touch any of the stuff left there. When I was around 17, I had gotten home from work rather late. I went straight to my room to change, and found myself hungry. It was probably around 1 AM by the time, and I didn't want to cook anything and make too much noise, as I was afraid I would wake up the parents. So when I ventured into the kitchen, I started shuffling through the cupboards looking for a quick fix of snack food to tide me over until the morning. Now our kitchen was positioned so that the kitchen door led to the backyard. The door itself was an old wooden door, but my dad had added one of those heavy metal security gates on the outside for good measure. It was one of the security gates where the holes on the door were small enough so that insects could not get through, and therefore we could leave the wooden door open in the summer to allow for a breeze to go through the house. In addition to the security door, my dad had also installed one of those auto security lights. You know, the ones that go on automatically whenever their motion sensor is triggered. Usually the light would only go on when I let my dog outside to pee at night. However, this night, he was already lounging in my room waiting for me to come back with some snacks for him as well. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I was busy creeping through the cupboards when I finally hit the jackpot with some Pop-Tarts. Knowing my dog, I didn't want the chance of him snagging the tart from my hand, so I ate it as I opened them up and started munching on them in the kitchen. As I'm standing there eating the first Pop-Tart, I hear a faint whistling sound from outside. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I noticed the whistling was a distinct tune, not random whistling. I didn't know the tune, but I could tell it was from a song. Sounded like a happy and sad song all rolled into one. After standing there for about 20 seconds, I decided it must be one of my friends that lives down the block screwing with me. Maybe they were on the other side of the fence and whistling there to scare me. Right when I'm thinking this, I see the security lights suddenly turn on. I quickly looked around the surrounding area, but didn't see anyone or anything that could have set the light off. The whistling still goes on. Now I am in semi-panic mode. Is it one of my friends? If so, where are they hiding? If it's not one of them, then who is it? I'm stuck here standing there now and I can't move as I stare outside waiting for something to happen. Nothing does. A minute or so goes by, with the whistling continuing and the light remaining on. Suddenly, the whistling gets louder, and I see the doorknob to my metal door start to move up and down. and I can see through the metal door to see that there's no one there. The whistling sounds like it's right outside now, and the doorknob keeps moving like someone's trying to get in. The security light is still on, so I have a clear view of the front door and know for sure that there's no one there. Screw the Pop-Tarts. I dropped the box and jetted back into my room and slammed and locked the door and hid under my blankets with a baseball bat and my dog. I never went out to the kitchen at night after that. I once was alone in an abandoned warehouse in the middle of nowhere, with my now husband then boyfriend. We had been there several times before to play airsoft in the dark with friends. We were pretty comfortable with the place, though it did have a very creepy vibe. That time, we were sitting near the edge of a big open floor area where all the stuff used to be stored, just making out and stuff in the dark. It was the middle of the night and pitch black inside, and rain was pouring down on the metal roof. We were just doing our things and not paying much attention to anything else, until we both heard it and snapped upright. Footsteps, very close footsteps, and very distinct even over the roar of rain on the roof. My boyfriend quickly grabbed his flashlight and shone it in the direction of the steps where they were coming from. Again, we were in a very open area that was only one level, and the flashlight was strong. We absolutely should have been able to see someone if they were close enough to hear them like that. There was absolutely nothing where the source should have been. We both practically pissed ourselves and scrambled out to the nearest window pronto, and we never went back after that night. I had friends and acquaintances that were involved in a lot of things, from Kardec spiritualism to African candomblé to Psychretino Umbanda, and I was quite a curious guy. I didn't get into it, but some people developed or projected intents about me that I wasn't quite keen to indulge them in, and at least one of them took revenge. I had 2 ex-girlfriends that I know for sure did some macumba to me, and had this quick stint with a Wiccan that was sure I would marry her. And these 2 gay guys on different occasions mistook my friendship for something more, and they got upset about it. All in all, culminating in the perfect storm. Things got rough, very rough. Voodoo is very real, and these are some of the aftershocks. Serious car accidents, people pointing guns at me, hijacking, death threats for no apparent reason, and then possession of loved ones, objects moving and falling, spectres, orbs, running shadows being seen by all members of my family, and being slapped on my back with full force when I was alone. The most horrific nightmares I've never had, and out-of-body experiences. It was terrifying. It took my wife and I 7 years to finally get peace of this. We still struggle with the aftermath of it. There's nothing overly against us anymore, but what was lost and we're recovering. Maybe the worst part of it was trying to get help and being discredited and feared by people who were knowledgeable and supposedly able to help you, and being put aside as some sort of freak. We looked for help for 6 years with no avail. Only in the 7th one were we directed to an exorcist priest and to deliverance ministers that they were able to really do anything for us. And thankfully, we were free, but damage was done. It didn't touch our marriage, but there's a time you feel full of it and helpless. Thank God it stopped. Being involved with people who practice voodoo, going to their places, receiving their gifts, drinking and eating and partying with them, and promoting or homaging their deities is not a good idea. You'll contaminate yourself, and you'll never get out unscathed, if you ever get out. So let me give you some background before I go any further. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I have a friend who is 16. So, I am a paramedic when I got a call to my friend's house because she had fainted. She lives on the side of a cliff with a gated driveway. I had gotten to her gate, and there were people there waving me on and showing me where to go. There was one dude who was jumping up and down crying when I pulled up to the house. I gave him a look of, "Chill out, man." I told him to show me where the victim was, since at the time I didn't even know that it was my friend. I entered the house and was asked to go down to the basement. That looked like if it was from a 90s movie. I saw the person I had to treat. I took their pulse. Mind you, it was so dark. It made my job quite difficult, with about 10 people watching and my partner nowhere in sight, and I was beginning to get concerned. About 10 minutes later, I carried my patient up the stairs with some difficulty. I got outside and saw my partner bring the stretcher over. I yelled for him to hurry, because we needed to get our patient onto the stretcher, when I realized it was my good friend Ashlyn. I got quite worried knowing she was my friend, and she had some medical issues that if she didn't get treated for, it could be potentially fatal. I had my partner call for a lifestar to airlift Ashlyn to the hospital, and this is where it all goes south. The man who I saw jumping up and down was laying on the ground. I had my partner go see if he was okay, and he tells me that if I needed to call backup. I turn my back for a second, and then I hear the worst scream of my life. I wheel around and saw the guy had a knife and was pointing it at my partner. I quickly locked my friend in the ambulance to keep her safe, and then ran to my partner and tried to take the knife from the man. I was able to get him down to the ground and put his hands behind his back. Then I yelled, "What the hell, man?" He looked at me and told me that he just wanted to make it where my friend's treatment would be delayed, and that he hoped she would die. I was standing there thinking, you are one messed up weirdo. Not soon after, the helicopter showed up to take away my friend. At that point, I noticed that there was someone in my ambulance getting ready to drive off. I was about to shit myself because he started to reverse and leave. I quickly called for police backup, and that someone took my ambulance with a patient in it. The police said they would try to intercept the suspect as soon as possible, and I was flipping out, because I could only imagine how scared my friend was. About 45 minutes later, I got a call over the radio that they found an ambulance in a ditch. I was in the car before I could let them finish speaking. I had my team floor it to the location that it was at. When we got there, the ambulance was flipped and my friend was screaming in pain. Everyone rushed up to help her. When it was clear, we got her loaded up into the helicopter to take her to hospital, which was about an hour away. I followed in the car, and when I got there my friend was in surgery to get her back fixed, since she had a metal rod in the whole ordeal, and it was dislodged. Let me tell you, it's very painful when that happens, and her not having medication for over 45 minutes made me feel very bad for her. Once she was released 2 weeks later, I sat down and asked her who she thought the man was. She told me that it was one of her older friend's dads who was coming to kill her, since she broke up with that friend for being misleading in life. Overall, I now always watch my back on calls, and at the first sight of danger, I call police for backup. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I have a question for all of you. Last night's video didn't do so great. In fact, it's probably been my least viewed video for the whole year, which, for such a great story I found to be an incredible disappointment. But still, I think it's important that I learn from my mistakes, and would really appreciate some vocal feedback from you guys as to why you didn't watch it. Did you guys see the thumbnail and find it unappealing? Was the title something that didn't interest you? Any feedback at all would be tremendously appreciated, so that I can understand and do better for you guys in future. Even dropping a like on a comment of someone who shares your thoughts on this would really help me out. So please, even if you are someone who usually doesn't interact much in the comment section, I implore you to just this once, please share your feedback with me, as I can't hope to get any better without you. Thanks guys. I really hope you did enjoy today's video though, and if you did, please help by dropping a like and leaving a comment. It goes a long way in helping more people with a taste for horror find my channel, as well as helping me grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell icon to keep up to date with everything I post. If you'd like me to read your story on my channel, just feel free to share it to my email or Reddit. Both can be found in the description. And if you still want to listen to even more horrors, check out yesterday's video. Seriously, it's really good. I don't know why more people didn't click on it, which is what I'm hoping you'll tell me. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.